So it's pretty wild that this isn't getting more coverage. I mean, a few days ago, President Trump released a memo where he laid out indicators of domestic terrorism, authorizing a joint terrorism task force to investigate and prosecute groups that disrupt the functioning of a democratic society. Now, on the surface, that sounds pretty reasonable, right? But take a look at some of the indicators here. Anti-Christianity, extremism on migration, and hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on morality. I don't even know what that last one means. Now, personally, I think this is an important subject, but also something that could unintentionally come across as alarmist or almost conspiratorial, and that doesn't really help anyone. So today we're joined by Ken Klippenstein, who's been leading the charge on reporting this new memo to help walk us through what it is, what it isn't, and what to watch for going forward. You can find a link to Ken's work as well as the source memo in the description below. And with that, let's get to the conversation. All right, Ken, thank you so much for taking the time, sir. We're here to talk about NSPM 7, which is a mouthful, but your recent article starts out by calling this a new directive targeting anti-Christian, anti-American, and anti-capitalism opinions. What? Is that for real?
Yeah, and I think part of the reason it hasn't gotten picked up so much is because it just sounds so bizarre that people understandably think, oh, this must just be the media having another hissy fit about whatever, like the Quantico meeting. There was all this reporting running up to it saying, oh my God, there's never been this many generals. Is there going to be a purge and all these things? And it was like, obviously completely, I mean, there's plenty to criticize about it in my view, but it wasn't a purge. It wasn't going to be a purge. The military doesn't work that way, as you know. General officers have their own, their own understanding of the role of the military. They're not just going to become, Trumpists overnight. But in this case, what NSPM 7 refers to as National Security Presidential Memorandum. And this is distinct from executive order. I saw it misreported in a number of outlets that should have known better, just in their kind of breaking stuff when it first got reported, describing it as an executive order. So National Security Presidential Memorandum, there's only been 6 others of those this term. They're far less common than executive orders. Executive orders there's like over 200 of at this point, and it's, they're pretty narrowly tailored. Like there was one on gender ideology, I think they called it, just telling websites not to use. A lot of the executive orders
were, we want to do this kind of thing. And it just
very small, day-to-day level stuff. Presidential memorandum, this is like a sweeping statement of what our priorities are going to be over the next 3 years, over the entirety of the administration. And what this particular one did is it's tasking basically all of the federal law enforcement, from the FBI to Federal Protective Service to whatever, telling them we are going to focus on politically driven crime and treat that as a counterterrorism matter rather than the routine criminal matter that it typically is. And when you treat something as counterterrorism, you've got to. So then, what is it predicated on? Because ordinarily, law enforcement is predicated on a crime has been broken. Now let's go and gather evidence and then make the case and charge the person who we think broke the crime. In this case, they want to preempt the crime, and the document says this again. I'll stress throughout. I'm not paraphrasing. It says prevent crimes before they have happened, and that's sort of a hallmark of counterterrorism.
Yeah.
And one can imagine situations where that makes sense. Like if someone's making a dirty bomb, I think it makes sense to preempt a dirty bomb attack. It could hurt a lot of people. Very scary. 9/11, things like that. You can picture mass casualty events. But in the case of, they list things like doxing and I think vandalism of Teslas and things, certainly stuff that should be charged. But I don't know that it rises to the level of a mass casualty event and necessitates this kind of response. But in any case, that's the response they set up. And you were just mentioning those examples: anti-Christian sentiment, anti-government. One was anti-family. Some of them are really vague, like anti-traditional family, which is
it up here. Let's see. It's from your article. Hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on family. I don't know what that means.
Is that like a bachelor?
Category, but
because I can think of a lot of people that do you know what I mean? It's that's a broad category, and so these are supposed to be what are called the indicators. Because in counterterrorism, you have to look to indicators because a crime hasn't yet been committed. It's basically pre-crime. Now, I'm not. Yeah. I don't want to. I'm not trying to smear counterterrorism as approach because again, I think there are situations where that's warranted. You don't want a WMD going off. But, for this kind of stuff, again, vandalism and things, it's it kind of was alarming to me to see this. And then also to have these categories which describe millions of people in the country as opposed to, so there's 2 problems. One is a civil liberties question. The other one is how effective are you going to be in preventing things if your indicators are things that describe like half the country, you know?
Narrows it down, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's worth real quick, like, diving into whether or not this is really serious, right? So we've been dealing with now for years and years that everything Trump does gets viewed on the one hand as like, this is the end of civilization. And we're still here. So like, a lot of things have been blown out of proportion. Something that comes to mind for me is the flag burning executive order thing from a couple months ago. Where like generally it was just saying don't burn flags, and there was like no teeth to it at all. Right. So performative maybe is a way to put it. How does this fall down in that category? Like, is it an actual thing, or is this more just kind of to rile up certain people in his base?
Yeah, so in the case of presidential memoranda, those are a lot more serious than executive orders, not just because it's sketching out like a strategic vision for what they want agencies to focus on, but that's going to determine the priorities that the different, say, field offices in the FBI set. And those priority sets determine where resources are put. That determines who's promoted, how many cases can you make that adhere to this thing. And, you know, so let's say after 9/11, the priority set is going to be Al-Qaeda. It's going to be, you know, these foreign terrorist organizations. But in this case, the focus is completely domestic. And this kind of echoes rhetoric we've been hearing from the administration. I mean, Trump at the Quantico speech, it wasn't a coup. I never thought it was going to be a coup, but he did say some things that were concerning. One was the enemy within. You had a great segment.
A couple times. He hit that a couple times, yeah.
Yeah, you had a great segment on it, and it's kind of like, wait, what? And I guess the context in which all this is happening, another way the media tends to get stories, misreport stories, is when they describe phenomena that are building up to a point, and then they attribute it all to Trump. I mean, the global war on terror, the GWOT, has come to an end, and so the national security state is kind of trying to decide what is counterterrorism going to look like going forward. And Trump has come in and offered and said, it's the enemy within. And as I understand it from my own sources, the national defense strategy puts homeland defense paramount. And that's the first time, certainly in my lifetime, that that's been the case. Ordinarily, it's been, you know, like the Pacific or the Middle East or whatever it is. So all of this is culminating in, you know, in this case, the presidential memorandum that instructs all these agencies to try to start focusing on these things. And so it's a sensible question to say, how do we know that we should take this seriously? I think that's part of the reason it hasn't been reported much, is because it just sounds so ridiculous on its face. It's like, oh, is this just more of Trump's, yeah, like you said, posturing to his base and stuff that won't really happen. Here's why I think that this is completely distinct from that. First of all, we're already seeing consequences from it. The document is maybe 2 or 3 pages long. I encourage people to just go up on the White House website and read it. Unlike some other national security memoranda, for example, the previous one, 6, which is classified. We don't know what's in it. This is public, so you can just go through and read it and see that I'm just quoting directly from this stuff and not really paraphrasing anything. It directs the Treasury Department to start making suspicious activity reports, basically looking at financial flow between individuals that meet those criteria that we were describing before, and implement on that basis, basically like they're looking at any foreign terrorist organization. But in this case, it's domestic. There's a lot of confusion on this issue because I've seen people say, oh, well, there's no law for domestic terrorism, which is narrowly true. The State Department needs to designate foreign terrorist organizations for it to meet that criteria. But that doesn't mean FBI can't and doesn't investigate domestic terror all the time. They have a domestic terrorism watch list. As I was told, because of this memorandum, the domestic terrorism watch list is expected to roughly double over the next year because they're going to be adding groups and individuals to it. So there's been a lot of confusion, I think, around some of the legal minutia. Like, so just because you can't charge someone as a domestic terrorism in a court of law doesn't mean that you can't investigate domestic terrorism or that you can't watch list domestic terrorism or that you can't. And when you investigate terrorism, what you're doing, the approach that you take to something like that, you're essentially looking at speech. Because again, you need those indicators that are going to tell you what's going to come next. And I'm not saying that's always a bad thing necessarily, but it's something we should take very seriously, particularly when we're talking about American citizens. And so I talked to people at various NGOs. I've already spoken to 2 people at different NGOs who just contacted me and said they're already changing how they comport themselves, what they say publicly, to make sure that they don't run afoul of this new order. They're general counsels at these organizations, so it's already having an effect on how organizations engage in speech, the ideas they express, and that's what should be alarming. I mean, there's a whole continuum kind of at the extreme end, you would say arresting people and stuff. But short of that, there's all kinds of ways that this can affect the general climate. That doesn't mean that, there's black helicopters coming to get you. Although it does authorize, at that extreme end, it authorizes what are called joint terrorism task forces, largely established after 9/11. One of them exists in all 50 states. There's something like 4,000 personnel currently, many FBI, but also local law enforcement. And so this is really, I think, embodies what the hysterical response, in my view, has been to the National Guard deployments. I mean, I've had stories on basically all the deployments to major cities. And what I always find is people, particularly young men, who believe in the Constitution and are not going to just go and do Kent State like the media has tried to imply. And the culture of the military exists. They understand where the laws are. Yes, Trump says these kind of inflammatory things, but that's not going to, they don't have authority to engage in law enforcement on the ground. And so that's why you see these videos of these poor guys just wandering around picking up trash, because they don't have the power to actually do anything, But in the case of these JTTFs, they do actually have that power. So I think that this is a situation where something from the start, I've been saying the National Guard deployments are largely, I said theater in my stories on it. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't debate them and question if it's healthy for, our democratic culture to have troops anywhere. And when I talk to them, they don't like being there. But that's completely different in category than a JTTF, which has no posse comitatus restriction on their ability to operate.
The pre-crime thing is really interesting here, and I'm going to read off a couple of these indicators that you have in your article, and we'll have your article and the actual White House publication linked below for people to check out. But it's things: support for the overthrow of the United States government. Got it. I'm on board. That should be an indicator. And I'm sure it is right now for general terrorism. Extremism on migration, extremism on race, extremism on gender, and then hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on family, American views on religion, and American views on morality. I have no idea what some of those things are. I don't want to be on the bad list, but that feels very, very vague. I know was it a week or two ago the president came out labeling Antifa as a domestic terror organization.
It was 2 days prior to this memorandum, and I think that caused some confusion because I've seen reported where they conflate the two and they seem to think it's the same thing. These are separate. One was an executive order. This one is the presidential memorandum.
Well, one of the criticisms of that was, how are you going to define Antifa? So I think it is interesting then that a couple days later we've got kind of a definition of what we're looking for in terms of domestic terror. Do you see those? Are they kind of matched up like that?
Well, in the case of the domestic terrorism order, we had the same confusion over, there's no such thing in the law. Yes, you can't charge people as such. But again, that doesn't mean that we don't have a whole counterterrorism apparatus. You can go and look on. I mean, there's a section of the FBI for domestic terrorism. They absolutely investigate things. And then over the course of their investigation, they will charge any crimes that they find that might be related. They don't have to have a terrorism case in order to open one. So this is about opening cases and investigating people and civil liberties. That's where the debate is. It's not about this, frankly, arcane question of foreign terror organization designations. Although Trump has, said, and I've heard that the Office of the Director of National Intelligence is still trying to find a foreign nexus to Antifa, which in itself I find ironic because Trump's first pick for FBI Director Christopher Wray testified before Congress accurately, and as far as I understand it, that Antifa isn't some kind of, you can't point to a group called Antifa. There's no such group. It's a kind of an idea or a broad ideology and organizing principle, kind of like the old hacker collective Anonymous. There's no group Anonymous. This is a mantle people take up that maybe have converging views on something, but it doesn't mean that there's some cabal. But the interesting part of reporting on the story is learning that the administration, they really think that cabal, that coherent group, you've seen this in how Cash Patel has talked about his investigation into the gruesome murder of conservative commentator Charlie Kirk, finding who's funding it. And I mean, I thought that was rhetoric at first, but as I understand it, they really believe that they will be able to find something. And they haven't yet found any evidence. That's what Cash Patel testified to, but they're still looking. He said, we're going to look at every one of these Discord channels. That's like the gaming chat that they were in, and investigate every member that he was a part of. So they really think there's some kind of group there, even though, as far as I can tell, there's no evidence for that.
Does it seem to you from what you're hearing that this is more focused on organizations or individuals, both?
Well, that's what's so striking about the second order. So this lists both organizations, but it also says, quote, entities and individuals is the exact phraseology used in the document. So it's both of them, and that raises its own question. So you're just going after lone wolf guys, supposedly?
I mean, to be fair, we can't, right? Like the resources involved.
Exactly.
And that's not to go down a rabbit hole here, but one of the frustrations is whether or not you think that domestic terrorism should be at the top of the list. We have finite resources. And if you talk to people in the counterterrorism community, as you do, I guarantee none of them are saying we have enough. They're all saying we don't have enough. We need more. We need more resources, more budget, more people. So a percentage is now being drawn away from Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, Hezbollah, maybe cartels moving into the southern portion of the United States, shifting away from that towards groups that are against American values that they're probably going to spend their whole time trying to figure out what that actually is.
Yeah, that's the other thing is like, okay, just like the military, I don't think that the FBI has the same, I mean, I have to be frank, I think that the military is pretty upstanding in terms of its understanding of its role in the society and not wanting, just culturally, if you just have chats, they know that they aren't supposed to be involved in politics. I think the FBI is pretty good too, not quite to the extent that the military is. And so they're going to be looking at this and they'll have this set of priorities and you're getting promoted based on how many cases you can make along those priorities. So there's definitely incentives, but a lot of them are going to look at this and say, how do I implement this? Like, and they, you know, I was talking to a former special agent who was talking about media leak investigations and she had been involved in several of them. And she said, we hate those. I said, why? She says, it never looks good for us. We always look like the Stasi. And it was like this insight into that, you know, they're people too, and they care about what people think and they don't want to be so there are definitely, I don't want to overstate it. There's definitely all of these cultural prohibitions on this thing going out of control. But what I would point to is this point on the continuum that I was describing before, which is organizations engaging in self-censorship out of fear that something might happen. And we've been seeing this in all kinds of different respects. I mean, you know, they had the whole Jimmy Kimmel thing, and surely other late night hosts are watching that and saying, well, I better be pretty careful about a joke. And, you know, to the extent that that means you don't say something wrong, that's good, I guess. But you don't want them being, anyone knows, death of comedy is like overthinking it. So anyways, that it's this subtlety that doesn't get captured well by the press, that isn't the black helicopters coming in and kicking in your door, but it's still something that it's like worth questioning and worth being skeptical about, because we just don't know how the JTTFs are going to be used. To me, that is the big question. I will say, a day after the memorandum was signed, Attorney General Pam Bondi issued a order specifically alluding to, you know, it said like pursuant to the presidential national security memorandum, we're going to create, I think it was like a task force to protect ICE officers engaging in operations, whatever. So things are already being built on this. So I don't think there's any question that it's going to go beyond the chilling effect of speech. There will be operational use of the order to justify other things that they're doing. The question is how far that will go. Okay,
that sounds illegal. When you describe it, you know, the idea that somebody could be arrested for, let's grab a random one here, anti-Christianity, like that is illegal in the United States. So this is going to get challenged, I would imagine, right? Like,
no one's going to, no jury of peers or judge, or frankly, I don't think the FBI would do that. But what would happen is that they use this, where the debate should focus, I think, is to talk about, do we want these forms of speech to be acceptable to predicate investigation? And then maybe the investigation finds other acts of illegality, not the indicator itself, but other things they look at. I guess if I were to take it from the perspective of the Trump administration, they might see it as, okay, so anti-Christian people, maybe they're, I don't know, left-wing and extreme. So we'll use that as a predicate, and then we'll look in, and then from their point of view, they might think, well, maybe they're, I don't know, funding some of these violent protests or something. That would be their perspective on it. And the question to me is that really a reasonable, like, do we really want to be deploying resources and violating and, you know, impinging on people's civil liberties on the basis of their views about Christianity? And that's a completely separate question from whatever crimes they might be able to find when they look at them.
So maybe if I can offer a comparison here, tell me if I'm on on or in the right path or not. But in the general terrorism sense, if we find out that Preston is over here Googling how to make dirty bombs, that might put me on a list. And the FBI would be like, that is an indicator that this guy's going to do something bad. Don't let him travel. Keep an eye on who he's talking to. Maybe tap his cell phones, see where check his internet browser history, and secure his finances. Because that dirty bomb research is enough. Now we're saying anti-family sentiment on Discord could be that predicate to do all those other things.
Exactly. They can't throw you in jail for having the sentiment, but they can open something, and then maybe they'll find, maybe they'll audit your taxes. Maybe they will find that you were in contact with someone that they're interested in knowing about. And, it just opens the door to all kinds of things. And in the Bureau, there are very strict guidelines from the Attorney General around how they can open an investigation. In the same way that the military takes very seriously its own role in civil affairs and not wanting to interfere in politics, I have found that in the FBI, they take very seriously this question of predication, because they know that as soon as you open that door and you're able to look at things just based on what people like, that's a very serious matter. And I haven't seen any attendant debate that kind of matches the seriousness of this. And if this is what we want to do, if this is what the public wants to do, that's fine. But there hasn't been, to my knowledge, there hasn't been a single story in the mainstream media exploring this. So I don't think there's been any chance to debate it or question it, for some of the reasons we were talking about before. Maybe it sounds so crazy that people just write it off, or maybe it got mixed up with the previous executive order. But that's what I'm trying to do, is give people a chance to even look at it and say, what do you think about this?
Well, I was going to ask, are you seeing anybody officials come out in favor or against, and what are the points being made? It sounds like not very many.
So initially there were none. And then after I wrote my story, the congressman from California, Ro Khanna, came out with a statement. I was surprised by the language. He said that he said he began his career opposing the Patriot Act, and he said that in his opinion, this goes as far or further than the Patriot Act. But other than that statement, it's been pretty boilerplate, maybe from two other members. Only just today did I get, after publicly going on Twitter and saying, do you have any comment on this? And a lot of people kind of jumping on saying, hey, I'm your constituent. Can you please tell me what you think of this, maybe? Because so today I got a message from the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, which is supposed to have oversight of the FBI and federal law enforcement. Mm-hmm. This is Dick Durbin. He's the number 2 Democrat in the Senate. To my astonishment, I think yesterday or the day before, Courthouse News, someone physically just ran up to him, God bless him, a Capitol Hill reporter, and just said, hey, this NSPM7, what do you think of it? And the number 2 Democrat in the Senate, again, the Democratic leader of the Judiciary Committee, he goes, I haven't heard of it. He had no idea what it was. And this was like
things to do, man. Yeah.
He was just like 5 days after the thing was signed. And then same answer from Alyssa Slotkin, the former, she's always talking about how she's the former CIA.
Yeah, right.
I respect any government service, but if you're going to brand yourself that way, you should probably keep abreast of national security issues or something, and she's also on the Homeland Security Committee, senator from Michigan, Democrat. So every reason to not much disincentive to speak out on this. The same reporter asked her, she goes, oh, I haven't heard of it. And so it's like one after another, none of these guys. Meanwhile, I just feel like there's this mountain of coverage of like James Comey, which obviously deserves some attention. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it's kind of like, okay, that's something that affects James Comey, and to the extent that means something for political retribution. But this is something that affects, you read those descriptors. This has got to be millions of Americans. And Congress doesn't say anything about. So today, finally, I think because I've been banging this drum for so long, the ranking Democrat on the Intelligence Committee, Mark Warner, finally sent a statement, and I mentioned the ranking member of Judiciary. So people are starting to say something about it, but it's just outrageous that this isn't on their rate. Maybe it has something to do with the shutdown, I guess, to be generous. Maybe they're busy with that, but it's like there's so much hysteria about, like we were saying before, there's so much hysteria about so many things. The coming Trump coup at the Quantico thing, like certainly stuff that was alarming that was said there, but like not changing the character of the leadership of the military, as far as I could tell. At least judging from the amount of clapping I heard, it didn't sound like he had won over very many people. And then on something that's actually like actionable and is having an effect like I've described, there's just nothing. It's really frustrating.
So I know you're going to stay on top of this, and we'll have all of your information in the description below so people can keep up with what's happening. But what are you watching for here in the next couple days or weeks as it relates to this NSPM 7? Did I get it right that time? Is it NSPM?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. NSPM 7. The JTTFs, those will be the forces that they tap who will be able to go places and do things, and also exist in a cultural space in which they're more likely to be comfortable with those things than the military. I really think a lot of the stuff that you've heard some of the most strident voices on about the Guard deployments, that actually applies here. So I'll be paying close attention to those. The FBI, of course, because they run the domestic terrorism watch lists. And as I was told, that's expected to grow pretty dramatically. Something that I wish had gotten reported more, FBI Director Kash Patel alluded to there being a 300% increase in domestic terrorism cases. This is core to the vision, and he testified before Congress on that maybe a week and a half ago. I think this was the day after the Charlie Kirk assassination. So this is core to the administration's approach to security, and you'll see when the National Defense Strategy comes out, that Homeland Defense is going to be central to it. So, and this is something that we sorely need a public debate on. If that's what the American people want, that makes I'm someone who believes in democracy. I just don't feel that we've had that chance to audit this stuff and say, what do we agree with? What do we disagree with?
Well, you're getting the word out there. So Ken, really appreciate the work you're doing. And thank you so much for taking the time to walk through all this.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Preston.
All right, man. So thank you again so much to Ken for taking the time to walk through all of that. Ken's work, as well as the source memo, will be linked in the description below. If you want to take a look at those in their entirety, I suggest it. Both his write-ups and the memo itself, it's pretty short, all things considered. And again, really appreciate what Ken's doing here and just shining a light on some of this. I think it's an important conversation for us to have, whether you agree with this stance or not. I think it's good to have this out in the open, more people be aware of some directions that certain policies might take us. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.